Hello everyone, and we're here back again in Star Trek Online. I am Shane1288, and we're having another look at the Verne Temporal Science Vessel today. So 2 weeks ago, to the exact day we had a video on the channel where we went over the new Verne Temporal Science Vessel, otherwise known as the Tier 6 Wells, and, put it through a bit of a run and, applied a bit of an exotic damage build to it, and got a respectable result of about 84k DPS. Well, since then, I've made a couple refinements to the build and refined my piloting, and was able to get it up to 117k DPS, as you saw in this last video there, the last run through Infected Space Advance. Let's just have a look at what this looks like on the surface right now. So here we are. This is a parse of that run. As you can see here, we got 20k for the deteriorating secondary deflector, 18k from pets. Now about half of this, a little bit more than half of that, is from our fleet support, but the rest comes from our photonic fleet and the anti-time entanglement singularity. And then we just break down the rest of the damage here: particle emission plasma torpedo, gravity well, subspace vortex, entropic redistribution 3, hit for a max hit of 209,000, destabilizing resonance beam for 5.2k, tractor beam repulsor, and it just goes down all the way from there. You see, here we had someone running concentrate firepower. So yeah, it was a pretty good run, as you saw in the video, and it was largely due to refined piloting. Now we're gonna also take a look at some of the changes that were made to the build, because you got to make changes as you progress. And that's part of this game, is that you make these changes and you're going to improve your build as you go along. And that's what's going to make you improve in this game. So let's have a look at some of the things that we ended up changing in this build. So first and foremost, we're going to take a look at the equipment here. This equipment is largely the same. We got rid of the Terran Task Force beam array and replaced it with a gravimetric torpedo. We're running the same deflector, secondary deflector, impulse engine, warp core, and shields. Just as a quick reminder, the reason we're running this shield and engine set is for this 2-piece bonus of 25% all damage for our hazard and damage over time effects. If you want more information on the exact choices of these, you can go back to the previous video, which is linked in the description below. And in the back here, we're running the 4-piece chronometric calculation set made of the chronometric polaron beam array, the Omni, the Chronom torpedo, and the chronometric capacitor down here in our tactical seat. That gives us this click ability, which boosts our exotic damage for 30 seconds at a time. Now, we kept our engineering consoles exactly the same as before: conductive RCS with EPG, constriction anchor, and the Delphic tear. Now, down here, we did swap the swap the domino for a timeline stabilizer, and the reason for this is that we get extra science passive bridge officer cooldowns upwards of 15%, and if we have people around us, we can leverage the timeline stabilizer for a better cooldown reduction than we could with domino. Then here we got some crit severity with the bioneural infusion circuits, and still got this exotic particle field exciter with EPG. Now, in terms of these science consoles, this was a change recommended by Proteus from Stowe Tech Trek, that we should be focusing in on Control X consoles. And oh, I see we got a drain one that kind of got stuck on there still. Let's just swap that out for another control console. There we go. So that gives us a fairly healthy boost to the control and EPG stats. And if we look at those right now, we're running at 425 EPG and 259 control. And you saw those spheres just ratchet right up to the gateway when that was being run. Now, you might be wondering, did we change anything on the bridge officers? Well, no, we did not. These are exactly the same as they were before. Lieutenant Commander Science Temporal, channel deconstruction for building entropy. Causal reversion is our second heal on the build since we're not running an engineering team. And entropic redistribution, which, as you saw in the parse, hits for up to 200k DPS. On the Commander Science, we're running Gravity Wall 3 and Subspace Vortex 3. These are our main sources of AoE damage that aren't from the secondary deflector. Charged Particle Burst is not here for the drain. It's mainly here to spread the Charged Particle Burst effect around, which procs our secondary deflector and gives us a radiation attack on everything within this 5-kilometer sphere. Structural Analysis 1 is a good debuff for large targets, but as you can see here, it also procs our secondary deflector, so we throw that on targets whenever we can as well. Then in this slot here, we're running hazard emitters, tractor beam repulsors, which does a respectable amount of damage as you saw in the parse, and now is also activating checkmate, more on that in just a minute, and destabilizing resonance beam, which is AoE damage, proccing our secondary deflector as well. And then we kept our tactical seating limited in this lieutenant tactical slot. Now, moving on to the skill tree, I did mention that we were going to make some changes to the skill tree, most notably here that we took some points in resistance, but beyond that, it's largely the same. That's what the tree looks like right here. For our specializations, we're running Temporal Operative, maxed out, which gives us this nice 50 exotic particle generator build, and in addition to that, gives us a nice boost along the way here for damage over time effects and continuity and lots of other good stuff. Strategist secondary, which we're running here for this crit chance and crit severity boost, amongst other things. And also attrition warfare 2, which here, when we're not threatening, gives us extra shield regeneration and bonus all damage as well. And we can also click this diversionary tactics button, which is a placate that can help us reduce some threat. Now, moving on to our traits here for this build, we dropped Photonic Capacitor and replaced it with Inspirational Leader, and as you saw in the parse, that really didn't hurt our Photonic fleet numbers, so I'm happy with that change. But everything else here is the same as it was in the previous build. Now for Starship traits, the big pickup here is Checkmate, and we dropped Charged Particle Reaction for checkmate, which was, where is that on the list here? Charge particle reaction was right here, which basically made our charged particle burst bounce between other targets, and we really weren't using that to effect. So that was replaced by checkmate here, which gives us a boost to exotic and projectile damage. Still running exotic modulation for that bonus exotic damage. Improved gravity well is great for this build, as it makes that gravity well just last oh so long. Superior command frequency, and Honored Dead, which doesn't need much explanation. Space reputation-wise, bonus exotic damage here. We did pick up Torpedo Astrometric Synergy, advanced targeting systems for crit severity, aux power offense, and chronometric capacitor array just to get those bridge officer cooldowns down. And in case you're wondering what we dropped, we did drop aux power defense in this build. Then, as you can see here, for our active reputation, quantum singularity manipulation, the biomolecular shield generator, and the anti-time entanglement singularity. Now, moving on to our bridge officers, our duty officers rather, we picked up a secondary stacking crit severity duty officer. Since we're firing our energy weapons, we'll try and get as much crit severity out of them as we can. We got 2 of those now. Our emergency con officer, which reduces the cooldown of evasive maneuvers when we activate emergency powered engines. Gregamol to reduce the, or reverse the tractor beam repulsors. Tanan, which reduces our cooldown of our exotic damage abilities when we activate a gravity well. And this Zindi biochemist, whose name I'm not going to attempt to say, to have a chance at reducing our threat when we activate an exotic damage ability. Yes, it's only 10%, but 50% threat reduction would be pretty big for this build, as that is something exotic builds suffer from. And that's the build here. It worked quite well, and this will probably be my daily driver for flying science for the foreseeable future until we get something new, something more compelling that can get me out of the tier 6 wells. So that's that. But before we go there, I would like to talk about one other build that I kind of alluded to previously, and that is another build on this ship that uses the trait called Out of Time that comes with the ship. And, this was mainly just to experiment and see if we could make this trait work and see how well we could do with it. I prefer the build I'm using right now that I just showed you guys, but Out of Time does work. So we're going to have another look at a run right now, a 90k Infected Space Advanced run, where we run Out of Time, and there's a surprise with it. We'll see if you guys notice what it is, then I'll explain in just a moment.
You will lower your shields and prepare to be boarded.
All right, so we're back. There was our run, running out of time on the Verne, and the eagle-eyed of you might have noticed is that we were doing that without tactical abilities, and that's something that I wanted to do from the beginning when the ship came around. Is because for so long, back when I used the tier 5 wells for PvP, I ran the ship without tactical abilities. I relied on tac teams and whatnot from my team. I wanted to see if we could accomplish the same thing, get a respectable result in modern PvE, and lo and behold, we can. So, let's have a look at that parse right now. So, we got 91k on that run, a little bit less than the previous run. You see, we got 18k from the secondary deflector, 12k from pets, which includes 7.5 from the fleet support, and then a little bit from the anti-time entanglement. Then the rest is our photonic fleet and extra frigate that gets called in. Gravity Well 3, primary damage dealer, subspace vortex. The particle emission plasma torpedo here, as you can see, still coming in 4th on the DPS list, despite DPS excluding pets, despite not being fired under torpedo spread. Entropic Redistribution 3, 5.2k, max hit once again, 208k damage. Tractor Beam Repulsors 4k, Channel Deconstruction 3.9k, Charge Particle Burst, and that just goes down from there. And let's have a look at the actual build now. So this ship is designed to do one thing, and that one thing is to fly fast. The idea behind it is that if we look at the trait here, you'll see that if we keep our speed above 88 impulse, we gain stacks of out of time. And then when we drop below 88 impulse, we do receive a bridge officer cooldown, 2% for each stack that we had. So if we stay above that for 15 seconds, that's a 30-second cooldown for it. Now, the ship is fast, and it's fast enough that it rivals escorts in terms of its speed. It's got a 0.2 impulse modifier, and the downside of this is that you can't necessarily control your ship, because let's just look at how fast we're going to be moving under this here. We are now moving at a impulse 95, but if I remember to set the correct power levels, which is how I was running it in the run, you'll see we're upwards of 130 plus impulse, and we can just turn around and get to where we need to be. And that's the whole point of this build, is that we're going to run fast, but if we're going to be flying around that fast and infected, we're going to have some difficulty controlling the abilities such as channel deconstruction, because they only have a 180 degree arc on it, or destabilizing resonance beam, which is 135. So that's one of the hardest things to manage with this build, but when you get used to it over time. So looking at the actual build here, I'm going to start with the bridge officer seating, because that probably deserves the most explanation. We kept most of our science abilities the same here as they were previously, the difference being we picked up a polarized hull. And the reason for that is because when you activate polarized hull, you are immune to tractor beams, and the whole point of this out of time build is to go fast and to maintain those stacks of out of time. And if you get snagged by a tractor beam, even if you keep moving, you're going to lose that speed and you're going to get taken below that 88 impulse. So we don't want that to happen when we're making our run across the map. That's what polarized hull is for. We kept the other science abilities the same here. We picked up an engineering team in this ensign slot. This could have probably become structural integrity collapse, considering we're still running causal reversion and channel deconstruction as focusing around our healing. And then this is the out of time seat here, emergency power to engines and aux power to dampeners. Now we're going to look here at the actual layout of the ship and the items that I picked up. So I did drop the advanced temporal defense beam array as well on this build, because we don't necessarily need cooldown reduction. So the idea behind that was, let's pick up the Delta set for an increase in radiation boost, and the isokinetic cannon, which fires every minute. And as you saw in the parse, that gives us some nice damage, and I believe it is a 13% boost to radiation damage. Yeah, 14.2% radiation damage for having this up, and that affects the secondary deflector, so that's neat. Our impulse engine this time is the Advanced Fleet Hyper Impulse engine, and this has been re-engineered to be speed times 4. So combine that with our high engine power, emergency powered engine and ox to damp. You saw we were maintaining well over 100 impulse when flying around even turning. We moved our 2-piece temporal down to the warp core and the shield set to maintain that 25% hazard damage boost that you saw previously. Engineering consoles are the same as they were in our last discussion. And then down here, science consoles, we did drop one of the particle focusers and pick up the temporal disentanglement suite instead, and we did that to just buff the critical severity that we are getting from the build. And, you know, it still did 91k, so, and, you know, you might be wondering what are our stats here. Well, our science stats now we're running 389 EPG and 235 controls, so it's not over 400, but it still did a respectable amount, and that is a discussion that we can have going forward is, you know, is it better to have this crit severity here, or is it better to be north of, 420 EPG to determine how you want to fly your exotic builds? I think either work. It's just a question of preference, and you know it might work better for you one way or the other, so that's something we can discuss going forward. The only downside of this is that our clickability, the chronometric energy converter, which gives us bonus exotic damage, is now only 15 seconds instead of 30. Moving on to traits, it's the same as it was on the non-out of time build for the space traits. Starship traits we did drop Honor Dead for out of time, and our space reputation, instead of torpedo astrometric synergy, we have controlled countermeasures which will boost the damage that we get from our torpedoes. Now looking at our duty officers, once again, largely the same. We just got rid of the Tanon gravimetric scientist that was handling our cooldowns and instead added this matter-antimatter scientist for our ox to dampener's power to extend that to 21 seconds, and that just lets us fly around at high speed for that amount of time, you know, turn and not lose that speed, and that's very important for this build. So that's largely the amount of changes were made here, and you know, you saw the build and you saw that in the run, and you know it works. It's definitely an option here, and you know you might get better use of out of time on an escort or something, but it definitely works here on the Verne if you want to do that. So it is an option for reducing your cooldowns, but the build remains largely the same. And I should note that we did kick the timeline stabilizer so we could pick up the 3-piece delta set there. So that's probably it for our discussion on the Verne Temporal Science Vessel going forward. But, you know, I was thinking about this through the entire process here, and it came up into a question in my head. How much DPS is enough in, modern-day Star Trek Online if we're showing off a build here, if we're just trying to do advanced PvE content or maybe an infected space advance? What do you guys think's enough? 50k, 100k? 100k is probably overkill for queues, but showing off a build, 100k maybe, 50k, 80k, 75k, I don't know. Let me know in the comments down below, and maybe even vote in the little poll that I put up on the side of the video here as to what you think. And one final note before we go, thanks to Proteus and Astro Zombie from Stowe Tech Trek for their advice, and Proteus, was the one who mentioned go control rather than drain, and Astro Zombie for sharing the previous video around as well. So thank you guys. And with that being said, if this video was at all useful to you, like or subscribe, and we'll see what's next for perfectly unscientific gaming on Star Trek Online. See you next time, everyone.